as we'll discuss in a moment, that agriculturally speaking, you're only permitted to be involved in working the land, whether it's planting it, cultivating it, harvesting it, only for 6 years. The 7th year, the land had to remain fallow, and it was to be left as if it was ownerless, and all the produce was considered ownerless. Any Jew was permitted to come into the field and take whatever he wants of the produce. Once he takes the produce, he has to leave. The land itself is not ownerless. It's only the produce of the land is ownerless. Based on the psukim, the verses of the parsha, this produce has some degree of kedusha. It has sanctity. Perish shvius, you're only permitted to eat them up to a certain point, then they have to be destroyed. There's what we call kedusha shvius. The fruits themselves, the produce, whether the vegetables, whether the fruits, whether it's the grains of the land, have, because it's the produce of this sabbatical year, it has innate holiness. However, it's not a holiness that it's designated for God, and therefore you're not permitted to benefit from it, just to the contrary. Because it's from God's domain, so to say, therefore everyone's permitted to benefit from it. Now, the land of Eretz Yisrael is a gift. He gifted it to us. But the way the gift was given, for 6 years, the land is totally yours. It's like a tenant-landlord contract. The tenant has a right to use the land for 6 years. The 7th year, the land is designated for whoever the landlord designates it for. 6 years, you work the land, all the profits, the produce is yours. The 7th year, the produce of that land, despite the fact that it's due to your investment of cultivating it and planting it, doesn't make a difference. The payment is the 7th year, you have to leave it fallow, and all the produce has to be left for whoever chooses to go into your field to take what he chooses, what he wants. It's called hefker. It's ownerless. It's very interesting. We find at the beginning of the first midrash in Vayikra, in Mishkan Chuma, there's a pasuk in Tilim, which the Gemara also cites. We speak about Giborei Koach Osed Dvaro. Those who are Giborei Koach, those who are powerful, who do his word. So one opinion, one interpretation of Giborei Koach, who are they? These are the Shomrei Shvius, those who have observed the Shvius. Why the Giborei Koach? Because if a person goes and he works the field and he has all his capital investments, puts up a fence, protects it, and he wants to maximize on his investment, and everything is due to his sweat and blood in that property and his financial investment, all of a sudden the 7th year comes, the fences come down, whoever chooses to come into the land comes in, does not have to ask permission, and takes as much as he wants, and there's no acknowledgement of ownership. They don't have to be, there's no beholdenness to the owner, because the field is ownerless. So the Midrash says, if a person witnesses this and watches this, could a person contain himself? After all, you're seeing it, it's yours, it's due to your labor. And these people, you don't even know who they are. And they don't have to acknowledge you that you're the owner. How could you watch this and see it happen? There's only one answer. Ezo Gibor HaKovish Yitzro. Who is, as we just read in Pirkei Avos this last week, who is the Gibor? Who is the strong one? The one who's able to suppress his inclination. Because to be able to witness this and really be able to deal with it, you have to be a true Gibor. You have to be a truly strong person, tremendous willpower to suppress the inclination to allow this to happen. That's the Midrash. So therefore, the Shomrei Shvius, those who observe the Shvius, are Giborei Koach. So there's a question which is asked, which I haven't find anybody who asks it, but I've been asking it for years, that we read later, if one is not permitted to plant the field in the 6th year, in the 7th year, and the crop of the 7th year, one cannot take it in and harvest it because it's ownerless. So what happens in the 8th year? What are you going to eat? As it says later. People say, Manochal, what are we going to eat? Because first you can only start planting in the 8th year. Until you harvest that crop, it's at the end of the 8th year. So you have the 6th year, you plant, you have. So if the harvest only is sufficient, it'll carry over into the 7th year to some degree, but you sell it off, some of it, how are you going to survive? So the Torah says, Nosati birchos l'shlosh, I will give my blessing that the 6th year, you will have a bumper crop, that the field will produce a 3 years crop. So it'll carry over till you're able to harvest the 8th year crop. Okay? If a person comes to you and says, money in the bank up front, I will give you for the future produce that this field produces, and I pay up front. And I say I'm buying it, and I will send my people to take that crop that I purchased in advance. With the seller, and the seller agrees to this, would the seller have a problem, people coming and taking the produce? It's prepaid. Hashem says, the 7th year is ownerless, I will prepay it, and therefore I give you a 3-year bumper crop in the 6th year to cover you till the end of the 8th year. And yet it says that because Klal Yisrael violated 70 sabbatical years, we went into exile for 70 years to Golus. We were in Golus Bavel, the exile of Bavel, 70 years. For each year that we violated the tenant-landlord contract, that the 7th year we did not allow people to come in, we were put out of the land for a year. Every year we were out of the land for a year. Only after 70 years did we come back. But why? If Hashem gave them up front that prepayment, that the 6th year was the bumper crop, why did they hold people out? Why do they keep people out? That's the question that always bothered me. And Hashem said up front, you have nothing to worry. The 5 of the 6 years, it only produces a single crop. The 6th year, it produces a 3-year crop. It's clear, it's only because it's prepayment for the sabbatical year that the produce is ownerless. Yet they violated 70 shmitos, 70 sabbatical years. How do we understand it?
Rabbi, is your question, why did they violate?
Why did they violate? Why? I mean, Hashem says it's prepaid. I prepay, it's pre-purchasing. I'm paying, and therefore people have a right to take. But yet they said no. Were they that greedy? Was it due to greed? 70 sabbatical years, although they were prepaid, they did not let people in.
Right, but on a technical point, no, they're only produce you can really store for 3 years is wheat and something like that, as opposed to strawberries and fruits and everything else. But
we're talking about the staples. The staples. Hashem is paying you for the staple. Everything's not an orchard and a vineyard. At a vineyard, it's wine. I mean, you have 3 years worth of grapes. The value of grapes is wine. You know, you press the grapes, you have the wine. So you have 3 years worth of crop that you have a vintage. Now you have the vintage earlier. So based on this, you know, the Gemara tells us in later we're going to have above Mitzio, Adam wrote a person would prefer one measure of his own rather than 9 measures of someone else. If I could have something which I created, although it's 1/9 of someone else's, I prefer to have mine rather than have someone else's. So Rashi explains why. Because anything that you toil for and you invest your ability, it's considered special. It goes beyond the financial worth. It's something which this is your creation. You created it. It goes beyond payment. And therefore, a person, it's interesting. A person raises a child. Of course, we had in the Chovos Levovos writes that what a parent has to experience raising a child, unless there's a special love that Hashem gives a parent to a child would not be able to put up with raising a child. All the issues, raising the child, feeding the child, cleaning the child, clothing the child, all the other issues with the child. I mean, who's going to put up with this? So there's a special divine endowment of love which a parent has for their child. It's theirs. And therefore the parents take care of a child differently than a stranger would take care of a child. A foster parent is not a parent. So as a result of that, because of that investment of ability, love, finance, time, emotion, that child becomes special to the parent. It's the same idea, because anything you invest in something, and you have your sweat and blood and your labor invested, that becomes more special to the person. That's the understanding. So therefore, it's very interesting. Yogata Motzosa Tamin, a person studies Torah, and the Gemara tells us that if you toil for Torah, you merit a special divine assistance to come upon its truth, which is for other reasons, because God's not going to give you that understanding unless you demonstrate your dedication and your value of it. But once you've toiled, that Torah becomes special to you, because that's something you created. And it's very interesting. The Gemara tells us, based on a pasuk in the first capital, the first chapter of Tehillim, that Talmud Chacham Shemochal Kvodo Kvodo Mochel, that a Talmud Chacham waves his honor, he has a right to waive his honor. Why? Because in the first chapter of Tehillim, David HaMelech refers to the Torah as Torah Hashem, it's God's Torah, and then he continues, says, Ubetorosa Yegamo Yom V'Layla. And the person who studies it in his own Torah, he studies day and night, he meditates day and night. So the Gemara asks, here David begins saying it's Torah Hashem, it's God's Torah, and after you study it, it says, Ubetoraso, and his own Torah, you study day and night. So the Gemara tells us, from there we see that before you study the Torah, it's Torah Hashem. Once you study it, it's considered your Torah, because you invested the time in it, and you're the one who came upon it, therefore it's yours, and therefore Talmud Chacham Kvodo Mochel, a Talmud Chacham has a right to waive his honor, because the Torah is his. The Gemara uses the term in Aramaic, Torah delay. It's his Torah, and it's his Torah. You have a right to waive it. But it's interesting. Factually, it's yours, because to whatever degree you invest in that Torah, you value it. It's like it's yours. And the more you invest, the more you toil on it, and you come upon its truth, the more it becomes endeared to you, and becomes it's your asset for that reason. So when we speak about the Shomrei Shvius or Giborei Koach, we're not too much. It's just finances. It's not finances. Here, the person went and he created the quality of this property. He sees this produce. Something came about due to his toil. All of a sudden now, the Torah says the gates are open. Whoever wants to come in, he has a right to come in. Does not have to acknowledge you as the owner, does not have to say thank you. He ignores you, and he takes it as if it's his own. After I've created this, how did I just turn a blind eye on this? Therefore, that's what we understood. Therefore, for 70 years, they did not observe the sabbatical years properly, because they had difficulty swallowing this. Because you need this tremendous amount of control, self-control, to allow this to take place. Alan, go ahead. What do you say?
Rabbi, didn't you once mention that if you didn't have the proper kavanah, that Hashem would provide for 3 years?
I will say that. It's a Sifarno later.
So that, maybe they didn't get a bumper crop.
No. Wait. Before we go there. Okay, you can't put the horse the cart before the horse. Okay, first we have the horse. Got to feed the horse the hay, and then the horse pulls the cart. We're not there yet. Okay. But that's the way I understood it. It's interesting. If you take a look at the parsha, it says at the beginning of Bahar, Dabra b'nei Yisrael v'marta leim ki savo al oretz. When you come to the land, Asher ani nosei lochem, that I'm giving you. This is a gift that I'm giving. V'shav sa'oretz Shabbos l'Hashem. The land shall remain fallow, and that year of being fallow, you should dedicate it for Hashem. Meaning 6 years you're involved in the mundane. The 7th year, as we have Shabbos Bereshis, which it's to commemorate that God is the creator. At Shabbos L'Hashem, you refrain. Okay? Then the Torah says, Sheishanim tizrachar mecho sodecho. 6 years you will plant, you will sow your field. V'sheishanim tizmor karmecho. 6 years you will reap your vineyard. V'saftes tuosa. And you will gather in its produce. So here the Sepharo says something interesting. You know, farmers, there's such a thing as known as crop rotation. Why do farmers rotate crops? Because if a person plants the same piece of land year in and year out, ultimately all the nutrients of the land are going to be sapped, are going to be depleted. So the farmer rotates crops to give the earth time to what? To regain its vibrancy, its nutrients. But the Torah says, no. Sheishanim tizur kamecho. 6 consecutive years, year in and year out, the same piece of land, you plant that piece of that field. And ultimately you're going to bring in the same harvest, year in, year out. Not only that, in the 6th year, although you planted it 6 consecutive years without rotating crops, you can have a 3-year bumper crop. And this repeats itself. It's endless. It's never depleted. It's literally miraculous. That's what happens. But that's only if you observe the Shemitah. Meaning, if you follow God's way, it's like we have the Torah with the woman. She was a widow and her husband passed away, and he was a Navi, right? It was a Vaja Navi. And she had debts, and she was concerned that the creditors are going to take her children to debtor prison. So she went to Elisha and she told him the story. See, he told her to borrow as many vessels as she can, and he asked her how much oil she had, and he said to her, borrow as many vessels as you can, and just close the house, and let your children give you the vessels. And that vessel just kept pouring oil. Right? It's the Haftorah, we read one of the Haftorahs. And it boiled, and she filled up all the vessels. And she says to her children, are there any more vessels? They said, no more, there aren't any more vessels. So that one vessel poured forth oil, although it was a limited amount, it was unending the amount of oil until all the vessels were full. She sold off that oil, paid off the debts, and her family remained intact. I mean, how's it possible? One vessel, the oil just stopped flowing. It was a miracle. Although normally, under normal circumstances, you have to rotate crops because otherwise you deplete the nutrients of the soil. In Eretz Yisrael, it's not the case. There, everything is out of the ordinary. It's not bound by the laws of nature. Sheishan Tizra Karmecho. 6 consecutive years, you will plant that field. 7th year, it's fallow. Everything's ownerless. The 6th year, you will have a 3-year crop, despite that it was planted year in, year out. Year in and year out doesn't make a difference. But when do you have an appreciation for that? It says, V'shav so'oretz Shabbos l'Hashem. The farmer is like, in terms of a person who's spiritually attuned, is the least attuned than a person who's a Torah sage. People dedicate their lives to learning. That even he, being involved in the mundane, in the physical for 6 years, he has to take off a year. And that year he reflects on his spirituality, understanding that things don't happen by themselves. That's the Shabbos L'Hashem. And very often, if a person doesn't stop to reflect, what does he believe? He believes that's the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be differently, and he doesn't have an appreciation that God's part of the equation. So he says, even the Over the Adoma, the land worker, the farmer, even he takes out time because he needs this. This is a key component in his life as part of his spirituality to be able to have that level of appreciation. You know, we have Shabbos, we have every week in and week out. So you take off, you put on the brakes when the seventh day begins. For 25 hours, you have to be detached from the weekday. What do you do with 26 hours? You hibernate. It says Shabbos Lashem also. The day is dedicated. You have to understand that Shabbos Lashem, the day is dedicated for Hashem. And that's why Zochas Yom Shabbos Lakadshu, we say the Kiddush minimally. You have a Torah obligation, say Kiddush Friday night to acknowledge that this did not come about by itself. The whole concept, you know, we just had in Daf Yomi that by the Oli Regolim, when they would come, we had the showbread, which every week they would change the showbread. They would distribute it between the incoming family and the outgoing family. They put on new bread. The bread that was on that table for minimally a week was hot bread. It was like just take it out of the oven. Out of the oven. It was a miracle. And they would pick up that table and bring it out to the Oli Regom. It was in sanctuary. A non-Kohen is not permitted to go there, the covered sanctuary. They would pick up the table, bring it out into the sanctuary where the ordinary Jews permitted to come, and they would show them that the bread, although it was on there for over a week, it was fresh, and not only fresh, it was hot out of the oven. How's it possible? Lodia Chibosu Shel Yisrael, to show the love God has for the Jewish people, that we're not bound by the laws of nature, that after this period of time, not only is it not fresh out of the oven, it's stale. That's what it is. Meaning, the Beis HaMikdash is not subject to the laws of nature. This is not within nature. This transcends nature. Some say Eretz Yisrael transcends nature. Every other location in the world, you have to rotate crops. Every other location in the world, the 60, you don't have a 3-year bumper crop. If you follow the prescription, everything is different. If you live in Eretz Yisrael like you live anywhere else, you don't merit these miracles. Then you live within nature. And if you live within nature, then you have to rotate crops. The 6th year is not going to be this bumper crop. And Shabbos, the 7th year, you're going to have difficulty being able to tolerate people because you say, God left me in a lurk. What am I supposed to do? You know, you want to have the cake and eat it. Just end with a story, Rabbi Pinto. Many years ago, there was a certain person who was a Syrian Jew, and he came to Rabbi Pinto for a bracha. And he was already a young person, maybe in his early 30s at the time, and he wanted a bracha that he should succeed phenomenally in his business. He was doing very well. As a 30-year-old person, he was a wealthy person already. And he had investments in the stock market, this and that. Rabbi Pinto says, you're going to succeed tremendously. Okay. About a year passes. This person's son is hit by a truck. 15-year-old boy hit by a truck, or maybe he was 12 years old. He flew 30 feet. He landed barely with a bruise. Yeah. 2 months later, I'm speaking to him on the phone. This person wasn't a Yad Avram person. I say to him, you know, it's unbelievable, a miracle. Your son was hit by a truck, flies 30 feet, not even really injured. It's a miracle. He says, you know, I got a problem with Rabbi Pinto. He gave me a bracha that his past year I was supposed to make a fortune in the market. I didn't make a fortune. I made a quarter of what he said I'd make, which was plenty. But it wasn't like he said. I said, you know something, you're a fool. That your son's hit by a truck and he flies 30 feet, he should have been killed or minimally brain damaged or paraplegic. And you're complaining that Rabbi Pinto's bracha, because he gave him the bracha also, his family should be well. I said, you're complaining? You don't appreciate what he did for you. So unless you stop and you reflect and understand what it's all about, you miss the boat. You think it's coming to you. 3-year crop, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. You know, I was born under my lucky star. It doesn't work that way. This is what we call hashkocha protest. This divine intervention which causes things to happen. It doesn't happen by itself, but I want to tell you something interesting. Recently, we were speaking to this Syrian kid, And his last name's the same name. So he says, I said, are you so-and-so's son? He said, yeah, I'm the son. I said, it's unbelievable. I said, I remember you hit by a truck. He says, how did you know that? Nobody knew the story because I remember the story. He says, nobody knows that story. I and my father know that story. My friends don't know the story. I said, yes, I remember. It was a miracle. He says, it's a miracle that I'm alive today. And I have a family, I'm functioning. Okay, that's the story.